The bell above the diner door jingled, and the hum of quiet conversations faltered. Will Smith, seated in the corner, glanced up from his plate of fries. His eyes locked onto a young black man at the counter, sitting alone, sipping his coffee with a nervous energy. Moments later, a group of men barged in, their laughter loud and mocking. "What are you doing here, boy?" one of them sneered. The man at the counter straightened, his grip tightening around his cup. "Just having some coffee," he replied, his voice steady but laced with tension. The group exchanged knowing smirks, their steps slow and deliberate, as they closed the distance to the counter. Will leaned back in his seat, his gaze sharpening. He could feel the storm brewing in the room, and something told him he wouldn't be able to stay silent for long. The young man, dressed neatly in a button-down shirt and slacks, looked like he'd just finished work or a long day of study. His quiet demeanor and composed tone didn't seem to matter to the group of men closing in on him. "Well, look who decided to join us," one of them sneered, leaning against the counter. "What are you doing here, boy? You lost or something?" The young man, though visibly nervous, took a breath and turned toward them. "I'm just here for some coffee," he said, his voice steady but strained. The men exchanged glances, their smirks widening. One of them stepped closer, towering over the young man. "You're sitting in the wrong place, friend," he said, sarcasm lacing every word. "Why don't you take that coffee and get out of here?" When the young man didn't move, another grabbed his mug, the hot liquid sloshing onto the counter. With a sneer, he threw it onto the floor, the crash reverberating through the silent diner. "One more time," the man growled. "We're not gonna ask so nicely again." Before the young man could respond, a voice from across the room rang out. "Hey," Will said, his tone sharp enough to cut through the tension. All eyes turned to him. The leader of the group spun around, his expression shifting from smugness to irritation. "What's it to you?" he snapped. Will stood, his tall frame imposing without effort. "It's everything to me when I see a bunch of grown men acting like schoolyard bullies," he said, his voice calm but commanding. The group hesitated, sizing him up. They knew who he was now, but they didn't care. The leader sneered. "This ain't Hollywood, superstar. You don't belong here either." Will took a step closer, his gaze steady. "Maybe not," he said, "but I'm here now. And I'm not gonna stand by while you try to make yourself feel big by tearing someone else down." The leader laughed, but it lacked confidence. "You think you can take us?" Will's response was measured, deliberate. "I think you've already lost. Everyone here sees exactly what kind of cowards you are." The man lunged at Will, but he sidestepped easily, deflecting the swing. His calm demeanor only made the aggressor look more foolish. "That's enough," Will said firmly. "Leave now, before you embarrass yourselves any further." The waitress behind the counter, finding her voice, called out, "You heard him. I'm calling the cops." Muttering curses, the group backed off, the leader throwing one last glare at Will before storming out. Will turned to the young man, who was still sitting, his hands trembling slightly. "You all right?" Will asked gently. The young man nodded, his voice shaky. "Yeah, thanks. I didn't know what to do." Will sat down next to him, gesturing for the waitress to bring another coffee. "What's your name?" "Marcus," the young man replied. "I just wanted a break. Didn't think it'd turn into that." Will leaned forward. "Marcus, you don't deserve what just happened, and you don't have to take it." He handed Marcus a card. "If you ever need someone in your corner, call me." The waitress placed the fresh coffee in front of Marcus, her expression softening. "It's on the house," she said. The next day, A video of the confrontation went viral, sparking outrage and discussions about racism and courage. In interviews, Will downplayed his role. "It's not about being a hero," he said. "It's about doing what's right when it matters." Marcus, inspired by the encounter, started using his voice to speak out against injustice. Months later, he sent Will a letter. "You gave me more than protection that night," it read. "You gave me the courage to believe in myself." Will framed the letter, hanging it in his home office. But what stayed with him most wasn't the gratitude, it was the lingering pain of what Marcus had endured. Late one evening, Will sat alone, rereading Marcus's letter. His thoughts drifted to the stories his grandmother used to tell. Stories of sitting in the back of buses, of whispered warnings to stay safe, of enduring humiliation with quiet dignity because the world left them no other choice. And yet, here it was, generations later, the same wounds bleeding in new forms. Will's chest tightened. How many more Marcuses were out there, quietly enduring, silently hoping someone would stand up for them? He looked at the framed letter, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. "We should all feel ashamed," he whispered to himself, "not just for what's happened, but for what we've allowed to keep happening." Tears welled in his eyes, not just for Marcus, but for every untold story, every moment of pain that went unnoticed. This isn't just about speaking up, Will thought. It's about changing the world so no one has to go through it again. As he wiped his face, a quiet resolve settled over him. The fight wasn't over, and he would make sure the next generation had fewer battles to face. Sometimes, courage starts with a voice. But change demands action.